Lord Owen, thank you very much for being with the national television here in Athens.
Pleasure.
We're in the middle of a war in Europe from Putin's Russia against Ukraine. I don't see reasons to be optimistic about the future of this conflict. And there are voices around the continent who actually talk about the necessity of a compromise with Putin. What maneuver moves are left after the annexation parts of Ukraine?
Well, what room for political maneuver is up to the president of Ukraine. I don't think we on the outside should tell them what to do. They're taking the sacrifices. They've fought a brilliant campaign, and it's for them to know when is the time to talk. Ultimately, most wars end in talking. It's very rare you have an absolute victory.
Were you expecting this kind of resistance from the Ukrainian people?
Frankly, no. I was shocked and surprised and delighted.
Do you think Putin was expecting such a reaction?
I think he's still shocked. I think it's shaken him up. I think he suddenly discovered that he hasn't got what many of us thought was a really effective army. And there must be some deep questions as to why. Is it the Russian problem of corruption? Did money that was meant to go to the armed forces go elsewhere? Probably. It's inexplicable. But the other factor is the spirit of the Ukrainians and the way they're fighting intelligently, cleverly, and with great courage.
Do you sense that Putin's threats on possible use of nuclear weapons is credible or not?
Well, it's credible to the extent that he has them. It's also credible to the extent that he has written, and the strategy of Russia is that you can have a tactical nuclear warfare exchange. I think that is dangerous nonsense. I think once you start a nuclear exchange, all the evidence is that it escalates right up and more nuclear weapons are used, more people, millions of people can be killed. So I think it's an outrageous view. It's got to be stopped. It hasn't been the view of Russian leaders for over 30 years, actually. Even back in Brezhnev's time, when I used to negotiate with him and Gromyko, neither of those two men wanted nuclear war. And neither of them would have pressed a button for a nuclear exchange with any ease at all. They were very apprehensive about it.
You have written extensively on the hubris syndrome in your latest, in one of your books, and I wonder whether you sense that Putin is exhibiting signs of hubris in the sense that there's no one there to challenge his decisions.
That's certainly a factor, that he's been isolated over COVID. He seems to have nobody who can really say to him, this is absurd. He's come under the influence of the head of the Orthodox Church in Russia, and that has not been a good influence. And I think he's started to talk a theory that Russia has the right to have an empire. I mean, has Britain the right to have its empire? Has any of us the right to go to war, to win territory? He's alienated the world, in my view, Russia now. There are very few friends. Not even China is really happy with the way they're conducting the war.
And previously you have also said you're suspicious maybe he's on steroids.
Well, I think that he may well be on what we call anabolic steroids. This is what weightlifters take. They're different from corticosteroids. And one of their side effects, apart from being addictive, is aggression. And aggression is very high now in Putin's. I've never known him personally. I've seen him at meetings and things like that, but I don't know him. But it seems to me to be, some people say he's always been a pretty nasty piece of work and difficult and aggressive. I think there's more aggression now. And then you see him on the end of this long table, and then President Macron comes in and sits at the end of this long table. I'd have picked up the chair and taken it halfway down the table and sat down and start the conversation. It's ridiculous the way he's behaving. And I think they need to be much tougher with him if they think there's any advantage in conversation. Sometimes there is. But for goodness sake, don't let him dictate the terms on which you meet. Something really wrong in Western leaders sitting at the end of this long table.
Right.
You know, what are they made of?
Is the hubris syndrome applicable in Tayyip Erdogan's case too, you think? With Turkey, with what's going on there, he's in power for more than 20 years with no democratic accountability, with journalists in jail, and with the opposition in a very strange situation?
I don't know Erdogan enough to say really whether he's got hubris syndrome. Certainly there's some parts of it. But I mean, his behavior is extraordinary and he gets away with things that he shouldn't. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's a member of NATO, for goodness sake. And I think he should remain one if we can possibly. It's better to have him inside the tent. But he is stretching the tolerance of NATO members. And even President Trump took sanctions against him. Mm-hmm. He's got to start to live in the real world, and the real world in particular is oil and gas is around the Greek coast, it's around the Turkish coast, the Cypriot coast, it's around Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Egypt. Mm-hmm. You're all going to have to come to an agreement as to how to extract that oil. And I was in an oil company in Texas, and we looked at these oil assets. They're real, they're serious. And they're going to greatly improve all the countries. So this idea you can sort this out by military action is absurd. If you want oil and gas soon, and your countries, all of you need it, you're going to have to settle around and follow the law of the sea, international law.
In a sense, the West is having to deal with two countries, Russia and Turkey, that have two pillars in common. In a sense, they have to deal with two autocratic states. And I wonder, you are in favor of a rapprochement between Europe and Turkey, or Europe and Russia. And I wonder under what terms such a rapprochement could take place, could materialize.
Well, basically, the best rapprochement agreements when people treat each other as equals. Mm-hmm. So this inferior treatment, denigration, I mean, the way that Putin going right back to Chancellor Angela Merkel, bringing a dog into the room when he knows that she doesn't like dogs and it's difficult. There are too many examples of Putin's behavior being highly questionable in terms of what are the normal performance of countries who may disagree with each other but still decide to talk to each other. And I think the sooner he goes back into a dialogue with Ukraine, the better.
Right. You had an active role in the Yugoslavian crisis back in the 90s. You were also active in the so-called Macedonia issue here in Greece, and between North Macedonia today and Greece at that point. Looking backwards 30 years later, how do you evaluate the role of leaders like Gligorov back then, or Konstantinos Mitsotakis, and what went wrong back then 30 years ago, you think?
Well, Konstantin Mitsotakis is one of my favorite politicians. He was hugely helpful to me in Athens here. We got an agreement with the two Serbian presidents, Ćosić and Milosevic, mm-hmm. and with Bulatovic, who was then a Montenegrin president. And we even got Karadzic on board for about half an hour. And he stayed up all night. He told Cyrus Vance and myself, go to bed. And he battered these people and used his influence. So I liked him, so I watched his son with great interest and with a good feeling about him. It's not for me to discuss your politics, but I think his father was a fine example of a great prime minister.
And what about Kiro Gligorov in Skopje?
Skopje is very, very difficult. Thank goodness the name has been sorted now, North Macedonia. It was ridiculous how long it took. I'm worried about the Balkans at the moment. I'm worried about the attitude of the Serbs in Bosnia-Herzegovina. I'm very concerned that Russia may be starting to stir the pot in terms of Kosovo, Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina. It's a dangerous situation, and we've got to be very clear and united about this and keep the United States engaged. When the United States was disengaged, they were damaging to Balkan peace and security. More the United States stays engaged, the better. Otherwise, they'll comment from a distance and make mistakes and make it much more difficult to keep peace. So the Dayton Accords is American policy, and they must stick with it and make it work.
Now, your country, Great Britain, is facing enormous internal turmoil over the last years. I wonder whether you think that it all started with Brexit and that the country has lost its direction afterwards.
Look, I'm been a pro-European for years, decades. I'm a Plymouthien. That's my constituency. I come from there. I was born there. And gradually I saw the disillusionment of people a long way from London. Plymouth's 220 miles away from London. Plymouth is a city, an international city, Navy and everything like that. It voted 60-40 to come out. And a lot of the problems and the reason why people in Britain voted for Brexit is they felt they weren't making the decisions that their democratic government in Westminster should be making. And more decisions were being made by 30 countries coming together. And so it suits the continent of Europe. I'm not against the EU in any way at all. I want warm relations. I think it's like the Reformation when Britain broke with Rome. We'll really know the answer in 100 years' time. It's going to take time. Mm-hmm. We all have to settle down. Friendships have got to be renewed. The negotiations were ridiculous, and the British negotiated every bit as badly as the Commission.
Mm-hmm. Finally, you are a strong advocate of the Parthenon sculptures coming back from London to Athens. I wonder whether you sense that this time something is different from previous tries.
I hope so, because I think your offer of providing marble models of all of them for the UK means we could have them there, and people could see them and understand them, and they could also better understand why we've given them back. Now, it could not be done until you built this fantastic museum. Once you did that, and it was not going to be damaged on the Parthenon itself, but within eyesight of it. It's a brilliant position in the museum, and I think we've got to be generous now. At one time I thought we could do it by rotation and everything like that. Now I'd make a big gesture if I was Prime Minister in Britain. I think it would be responded. After all, more tourists now seem to come to Greece for holidays, very sensibly, since I live here myself. And I think there's goodwill, and it's imaginative, the solution you come up with. And it'll cost you a bit, but it'll be good for us.
Thank you very much, Lord Owen, for being with National Television.